An icon is typically a painting depicting Christ, Mary, saints or angels, which is venerated among Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, and in certain Catholic churches. Icons may also be cast in metal, carved in stone, embroidered on cloth, painted on wood, done in mosaic or fresco work, printed on paper or metal, etc. Icons are often illuminated with a candle or jar of oil with a wick. The illumination of religious images with lamps or candles is an ancient practice predating Christianity. Although common in translated works from Greek or Russian, in English iconography does not mean icon painting, and iconographer does not mean an artist of icons, which are painted or carved, not written, as they are in those languages. Comparable images from Western Christianity are generally not described as icons. Although iconic may be used to describe a static style of devotional image. Acharapoietia. The tradition of acharapoietia accrued to icons that are alleged to have come into existence miraculously, not by a human painter. Such images functioned as powerful relics as well as icons, and their images were naturally seen as especially authoritative as to the true appearance of the subject. Naturally, and especially because of the reluctance to accept mere human productions as embodying anything of the divine, a commonplace of Christian deprecation of man-made idols. Like icons believed to be painted directly from the live subject, they therefore acted as important references for other images in the tradition. Beside the developed legend of the Mandel lion or image of Edessa, was the tale of the Veil of Veronica, whose very name signifies true icon, or true image, the fear of a false image remaining strong. Stylistic developments. Although there are earlier records of their use, no panel icons earlier than the few from the 6th century preserved at the Greek Orthodox St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt survive, as the other examples in Rome have all been drastically overpainted. The surviving evidence for the earliest depictions of Christ, Mary and saints therefore comes from wall paintings, mosaics and some carvings. They are realistic in appearance, in contrast to the later stylization. They are broadly similar in style, though often much superior in quality, to the mummy portraits done in wax and found at Fame in Egypt. As we may judge from such items, the first depictions of Jesus were generic rather than portrait images, generally representing him as a beardless young man. It was some time before the earliest examples of the long-haired, bearded face that was later to become standardized as the image of Jesus appeared. When they did begin to appear, there was still variation. Augustine of Hippo said that no one knew the appearance of Jesus or that of Mary. However, Augustine was not a resident of the Holy Land and therefore was not familiar with the local populations and their oral traditions. Gradually, paintings of Jesus took on characteristics of portrait images. At this time the manner of depicting Jesus was not yet uniform, and there was some controversy over which of the two most common icons was to be favored. The first, or Semitic, form showed Jesus with short and frizzy hair, the second showed a bearded Jesus with hair parted in the middle. The manner in which the god Zeus was depicted. Theodorus Lector remarks that of the two, the one with short and frizzy hair was more authentic. To support his assertion, he relates a story that a pagan commissioned to paint an image of Jesus used the Zeus form instead of the Semitic form, and that as punishment his hands withered. Though their development was gradual, we can date the full-blown appearance and general ecclesiastical acceptance of Christian images as venerated and miracle-working objects to the 6th century, when, as Hans Belting writes, we first hear of the Church's use of religious images. As we reach the second half of the 6th century, we find that images are attracting direct veneration and some of them are credited with the performance of miracles. Cyril Mango writes, in the post-Justinianic period the icon assumes an ever-increasing role in popular devotion, and there is a proliferation of miracle stories connected with icons, some of them rather shocking to our eyes. However, the earlier references by Eusebius and Irenaeus indicate veneration of images and reported miracles associated with them as early as the 2nd century. What might be shocking to our contemporary eyes may not have been viewed as such by the early Christians. Acts chapter 5 verse 15 reports that people brought the sick into the streets and laid them on beds and mats so that at least Peter's shadow might fall on some of them as he passed by. Symbolism. In the icons of Eastern Orthodoxy, and of the early medieval West, very little room is made for artistic license. Almost everything within the image has a symbolic aspect. Christ, the saints, and the angels all have halos. Angels have wings because they are messengers. Figures have consistent facial appearances, hold attributes personal to them, and use a few conventional poses. Color plays an important role as well. Gold represents the radiance of heaven, red, divine life, blue is the color of human life, white is the uncreated light of God, only used for resurrection and transfiguration of Christ. If you look at icons of Jesus and Mary, Jesus wears red undergarment with a blue outer garment and Mary wears a blue undergarment with a red overgarment. Thus the doctrine of deification is conveyed by icons. Letters are symbols too. Most icons incorporate some calligraphic text naming the person or event depicted. Even this is often presented in a stylized manner. Miracles. In the Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition there are reports of particular wonder-working icons that exude myrrh, or perform miracles upon petition by believers. When such reports are verified by the Orthodox hierarchy, they are understood as miracles performed by God through the prayers of the saint, rather than being magical properties of the painted wood itself. Theologically, all icons are considered to be sacred, and are miraculous by nature, being a means of spiritual communion between the heavenly and earthly realms. However, it is not uncommon for specific icons to be characterized as miracle-working, meaning that God has chosen to glorify them by working miracles through them. Such icons are often given particular names, and even taken from city to city where believers gather to venerate them and pray before them. Islands like that of Tinos are renowned for possessing such miraculous icons, and are visited every year by thousands of pilgrims. Eastern Orthodox teaching. The Eastern Orthodox view of the origin of icons is generally quite different from that of most secular scholars and from some in contemporary Roman Catholic circles. The Orthodox Church maintains and teaches that the sacred image has existed from the beginning of Christianity. Leonid Ouspensky has written accounts that some non-Orthodox writers consider legendary or accepted as history within Eastern Orthodoxy, because they are a part of church tradition. Thus accounts such as that of the miraculous image not made by hands, and the weeping and moving Mother of God of the Sign of Novgorod are accepted as fact. Church tradition tells us, for example, of the existence of an icon of the Savior during his lifetime and of icons of the Most Holy Theotokos, Mary, immediately after him. Eastern Orthodoxy further teaches that a clear understanding of the importance of icons was part of the Church from its very beginning, and has never changed, although explanations of their importance may have developed over time. This is because icon painting is rooted in the theology of the Incarnation, which didn't change, though its subsequent clarification within the Church occurred over the period of the first 7 ecumenical councils. Also, icons served as tools of edification for the illiterate faithful during most of the history of Christendom. Eastern Orthodox find the first instance of an image or icon in the Bible when God made man in his own image, in Genesis chapter 1 verses 26 to 27. In Exodus, God commanded that the Israelites not make any graven image, but soon afterwards, he commanded that they make graven images of cherubim and other like things, both as statues and woven on tapestries. Later, Solomon included still more such imagery when he built the first temple. Eastern Orthodox believed these qualify as icons, in that they were visible images depicting heavenly beings and, in the case of the cherubim, used to indirectly indicate God's presence above the ark. In the book of Numbers it is written that God told Moses to make a bronze serpent, Nehushtar, and hold it up, so that anyone looking at the snake would be healed of their snake bites. In John chapter 3, Jesus refers to the same serpent, saying that he must be lifted up in the same way that the serpent was. John of Damascus also regarded the brazen serpent as an icon. Further, Jesus Christ himself is called the image of the invisible God in Colossians chapter 1 verse 15, and is therefore in one sense an icon. As people are also made in God's images, people are also considered to be living icons, and are therefore censed, along with painted icons during Orthodox prayer services. According to John of Damascus, anyone who tries to destroy icons is the enemy of Christ, the Holy Mother of God and the saints, and is the defender of the devil and his demons. This is because the theology behind icons is closely tied to the incarnational theology of the humanity and divinity of Jesus, so that attacks on icons typically have the effect of undermining or attacking the incarnation of Jesus himself, is elucidated in the ecumenical councils. Basil of Caesarea, in his writing on the Holy Spirit, says, "The honor paid to the image passes to the prototype." He also illustrates the concept by saying, "If I point to a statue of Caesar and ask you, 'Who is that?' your answer would properly be, 'It is Caesar.' When you say such, you do not mean that the stone itself is Caesar, but rather, the name and honor you ascribe to the statue passes over to the original, the archetype, Caesar himself. So it is with an icon. Thus to kiss an icon of Christ, in the Eastern Orthodox view, is to show love towards Christ Jesus himself, not mere wooden paint making up the physical substance of the icon. Worship of the icon as somehow entirely separate from its prototype is expressly forbidden by the Seventh Ecumenical Council. The word icon in the Bible. The Greek word icon means an image or likeness that represents something else. An icon does not necessarily imply sanctity or veneration. Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures used by the early Christians, and Eastern Orthodox consider it the only authoritative text of those scriptures. In it the word icon is used for everything from man being made in the divine image to the molten idol placed by Manasses in the temple. Genesis chapter 1 verses 26 to 27. Genesis chapter 5 verses 1 to 3. Genesis chapter 9 verse 6. Exodus chapter 25 verses 18 to 20. Numbers chapter 21 verses 8 to 9, Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 16, 1 Samuel chapter 6 verse 11, 2 Kings chapter 11 verse 18, 1 Chronicles chapter 28 verses 18 to 19, 2 Chronicles chapter 33 verse 7, Psalm chapter 38 verse 7, Psalm chapter 72 verse 20, Isaiah chapter 40, 19-20, Ezekiel chapter 7 verse 20, Ezekiel chapter 8 verse 5, Ezekiel chapter 16 verse 17, Ezekiel chapter 23 verse 14, Ezekiel chapter 41 verses 17 to 18, Daniel chapter 2 verses 31, 32, 34, 35, Daniel chapter 3 verses 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 12, 14, 15, 18, Hosea chapter 13 verse 2. Be aware that Septuagint numberings and names and the English Bible numberings and names are not uniformly identical. New Testament. Though the word icon is found in the New Testament, it is never in the context of painted icons, though it is used to mean. In the New Testament the term is used for everything from Jesus as the image of the invisible God to the image of Caesar on a Roman coin to the image of the beast in the Apocalypse. Here is a complete listing. Matthew chapter 22 verse 20, Mark chapter 12 verse 16, Luke chapter 20 verse 24, John chapter 5 verse 39, Romans chapter 1 verse 23, Romans chapter 8 verse 29, 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 7, 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 49, 2 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 18, 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 4, Colossians chapter 1 verse 15, Colossians chapter 3 verse 10, Hebrews chapter 10 verse 1, Revelation chapter 13 verse 14, Revelation chapter 13 verse 15, Revelation chapter 14 verse 9, Revelation chapter 14 verse 11, Revelation chapter 15 verse 2, Revelation chapter 16 verse 2, Revelation chapter 19 verse 20, Revelation chapter 20 verse 4. Icon painting tradition by region. Eastern Roman Empire. Of the icon painting tradition that developed in Byzantium, with Constantinople as the chief city, we have only a few icons from the 11th century and none preceding them, in part because of the iconoclastic reforms during which many were destroyed or lost, and also because of plundering by Venetians in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade, and finally the taking of the city by the Islamic Turks in 1453. It was only in the Komnenian period that the cult of the icon became widespread in the Byzantine world, partly on account of the dearth of richer materials, but also because an iconostasis, a special screen for icons, was introduced then in ecclesiastical practice. The style of the time was severe, hieratic, and distant. In the late Komnenian period this severity softened, and emotion, formerly avoided, entered icon painting. Major monuments for this change include the murals at Daphne and Nerezi near Skopje. The Theotokos of Vladimir is probably the most representative example of the new trend towards spirituality and emotion. The tendency toward emotionalism in icons continued in the Paleologan period, which began in 1261. Paleologan art reached its pinnacle in mosaics such as those of the Caria Kami. In the last half of the 14th century, Paleologan saints were painted in an exaggerated manner, very slim and in contorted positions, that is, in a style known as the Paleologan mannerism, of which Ochra's Annunciation is a superb example. After 1453, the Byzantine tradition was carried on in regions previously influenced by its religion and culture, in the Balkans and Russia, Georgia in the Caucasus, and, in the Greek-speaking realm, on Crete. Crete was under Venetian control from 1204 and became a thriving center of art with eventually a Scuola di San Luca, or organized painters' guild on western lines. Cretan painting was heavily patronized both by Catholics of Venetian territories and by Eastern Orthodox. For ease of transport, Cretan painters specialized in panel paintings. Developed the ability to work in many styles to fit the tastes of various patrons. El Greco, who moved to Venice after establishing his reputation in Crete, is the most famous artist of the school, who continued to use many Byzantine conventions in his works. In 1669 the city of Heraklion, on Crete, which at one time boasted at least 120 painters, finally fell to the Turks. And from that time Greek icon painting went into a decline, with a revival attempted in the 20th century by art reformers such as Fotios Contiglau, who emphasized a return to earlier styles. Russian icons are typically paintings on wood, often small, though some in churches and monasteries may be as large as a tabletop. Many religious homes in Russia have icons hanging on the wall in the Krasny Ugol, the red, or beautiful, corner. There is a rich history and elaborate religious symbolism associated with icons. In Russian churches, the nave is typically separated from the sanctuary by an iconostasis, a wall of icons. The use and making of icons entered Kiev in Rus following its conversion to Orthodox Christianity from the Eastern Roman Empire in 988 AD. As a general rule, these icons strictly followed models and formulas hallowed by usage, some of which had originated in Constantinople. As time passed, the Russians, notably Andrei Rublev and Dionysius, widened the vocabulary of iconic types and styles far beyond anything found elsewhere. The personal, improvisatory and creative traditions of Western European religious art are largely lacking in Russia before the 17th century, when Simon Ushakov's painting became strongly influenced by religious paintings and engravings from Protestant as well as Catholic Europe. In the mid-17th century, changes in liturgy and practice instituted by Patriarch Nikon resulted in a split in the Russian Orthodox Church. The traditionalists, the persecuted Old Ritualists, or Old Believers, continued the traditional stylization of icons, while the state church modified its practice. From that time icons began to be painted not only in the traditional stylized and non-realistic mode, but also in a mixture of Russian stylization and Western European realism, and in a Western European manner very much like that of Catholic religious art of the time. The Stroganov movement and the icons from Neviansk rank among the last important schools of Russian icon painting. Romania. In Romania, icons painted as reversed images behind glass and set in frames were common in the 19th century and are still made. The process is known as reverse painting on glass. In the Transylvanian countryside, the expensive icons on panels imported from Moldavia, Wallachia, and Mount Athos were gradually replaced by small, locally produced icons on glass, which were much less expensive and thus accessible to the Transylvanian peasants. Egypt and Ethiopia. The Egyptian Coptic Church and the Ethiopian Church also have distinctive, living icon painting traditions. Coptic icons have their origin in the Hellenistic art of Egyptian late antiquity, as exemplified by the Fayum mummy portraits. Beginning in the 4th century, churches painted their walls and made icons to reflect an authentic expression of their faith.